Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Dave and Nicki Talk. Now, today we're taking a little bit of a pivot with welcoming Keshav Pitani, who is the VP at Scientific Games. And when I say a different direction, I mean in terms of both industry and focus, at least on the surface. For anyone who's listened in the past, our episodes to date have been focused on elements like security, health, and returning to work, and all the ways in which we're doing that in our own different ways, either individually or as part of larger organizations. And now Keshav is part of an enterprise gaming and lottery industry is going to lend a little bit of a different insight. And, Dave, I know as someone who is in slightly closer proximity to the Nevada gaming center area than I am, you might have some special enthusiasm around this particular vertical.
Are you trying to insinuate something, Nicki?
No, never. I would never do that.
No, yes. I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of gaming in this area. But yeah, I would love to definitely excited for today's conversation with Keshav. I think, Keshav, if you could really introduce yourself and give us a little background and context on yourself and your company, that would be great to start us off today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started my career designing modems at IBM back when they were actually developing PCs and laptops. And later on, I moved over to avionics, working on cockpit voice and data systems for commercial airlines. And then I did a couple of startups in telecom, doing residential broadband gateways and then wireless broadband. Came very close to patenting Wi-Fi, but missed by a month. And that was a lot of fun. But then I'm actually a gamer. I've been a gamer most of my life. So I joined a gaming startup way back in the early 2000s. And that got acquired by another company called Bally, and then eventually got acquired by Scientific Games. Now I manage game development studios at Scientific Games. And we actually develop games for all kinds of platforms, online, mobile, Facebook games. We do it for casinos. I recently pivoted to public gaming is what we call, basically lotteries and video lotteries and designing games for governments that actually use this to fund their public programs. And that's basically my background. And I also work at Stanford Business School as an executive coach in my free time.
So you're a little bit busy. When you spoke to the fact that you've worked with acquisitions and startups in the past, and now you're part of this larger umbrella of Scientific Games, when I was kind of semi-stalking you on LinkedIn in preparation for this conversation, I noticed a term that I'd never seen before, really, at least in my experience. That of intrapreneur, kind of adjacent to entrepreneur. Can you speak a little bit to how this governs your operating mode, how you set up your teams, and what that means for your work at Scientific Gaming?
Yeah, basically, I mean, to give you a background to that, it's basically when you're an entrepreneur, you're doing a business all by yourself, you run the business. Intrapreneur is you're part of a big corporation, but you're running your teams like you're a startup. But more than that, when you look at the way you try to talk about getting projects done and implementing big, massive, complicated things, people always use the word, we should be agile, we should be nimble, we should be like a startup. And that works at every team level. If your team operates like it's a startup, because there are certain elements of startup you want to bring into your group. And that can be done without the risk of being an entrepreneur. And that's what I meant primarily by being an entrepreneur. And I've done built several teams from scratch, and I've done several projects where I had to act very fast and make sure it actually works. Each failure for a startup is a life or death situation for the startup, right? So if you treat things like that, you get stuff done much more efficiently. So that's what I meant by intrapreneur.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm wondering too, with that, especially now you mentioned your teams, how, I guess, has this shift to our new way of working, right, with the pandemic and so forth, how has that impacted your team, team behaviors, even creativity and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, because one is what has changed in the way we work, and we as gaming guys, we are always expected to be creative from get-go. And we do a lot of games in every year, close to 100 games. And that means we have to be constantly creative. So that's one part of it. And the pandemic actually changed everything we know as it is, right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, we had to find ourselves doing this same things in different ways, in more innovative ways. And prior to the pandemic, I mean, obviously you probably talked about this and with other guests too, the digital transformation by itself is a massive shift, right? We were all thinking about digital transformation, but then one jolt, we're all in it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to innovation and creativity, though, I don't think it'll be as simple. It cannot be driven by one external force that immediately makes you more innovative. I mean, there will be more innovations coming out of this situation currently, and you will see more and more in the next few months and years. But at a fundamental level, I don't think innovation will change, especially in corporate settings. I don't see it completely shifting to, oh, we're suddenly more innovative because of this. What you need is a set of requirements to be met before you can say, you could be innovative at a corporate level.
Yeah.
And for startups, it's kind of different, but for corporations, it's quite different. I mean, I can go into the depth of why it is and all, but I'll let you ask the next question and before I jump into details of that.
No, yeah, and I think if I could just follow up just quickly with that, we're seeing it across industries, right? The notion is the necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I have a music, hobby, and we're seeing even in the music industry, this pan out, with now you can't, sort of perform or do concerts live. So now we're seeing a lot of, live streaming and Twitch. And so, yeah, we're definitely seeing sort of that, whatever is presented to you, sort of use that to your own advantage. Absolutely.
Right. And when I said that, innovation doesn't fundamentally change, it's because when people talk about innovation, it's very easy to say, oh, we are going to be innovative, or we will be innovative, or we are innovative and all. But when you look at the results in across the industries, right, not just one or two industries, any industry you take, a lot of companies that are really, really successful and being very innovative at the beginning always generally, end up failing. I mean, take Nokia, Motorola, Kodak, all these great examples. Everybody talks about them, right? And what fundamentally is the difference is how they approach any problem that they have. Innovation at a very fundamental level requires that it is solving some problem. And if you don't identify the right problem, you're solving the wrong problems, then you may not actually end up doing the right things for your industry or your company or your organization. And in this case, if you start looking at it from, what is truly an innovation? What is truly innovation for a corporate? You are looking at, changing the status quo, in a positive way, whether it's process innovation or product innovation. And it all starts with identifying the right problems.
Yeah.
And those things don't change whether the pandemic exists or doesn't exist, right? The problems for these industries will be there, whether it's, you identified the right one or the wrong one. And how you address it is where the challenge comes in for big corporates.
So taking that lens and shifting it from how have you or have you not changed the way in which you innovate given the current situation to more of the customer lens, customer behavior has had to change just by virtue of the environment today, whether it's in healthcare, because there's so many more regulations governing how we address our own personal care, as well as how we even walk around a storefront. How have you seen customer behavior in your industry, in the gaming industry, shift in the last 4 to 5 months since the pandemic broke?
We actually, we are B2B company for the most part. We rarely do, we do online games that people download and all those are the things that we do B2C. But there's a significant shift because the whole, global shutdown actually led to shutting down of all the entertainment avenues. So people have shifted dramatically to the online space. And most of our online business has seen more than 100% jump in overall sales and revenue and all that. So there is this massive shift towards that. But surprisingly, when they started opening up, bars and all the avenues and casinos and all these things, one thing we noticed is how people wanted to either get out of their homes or something. There was a pent-up demand for a lot of entertainment. And we've seen significant jump in revenue for some of these casinos and other operators with just half the floor space being turned on, and which is something we would have never predicted would happen. So there is a shift in the way things have changed because of the pandemic, but there's also these efficiencies that people have gained. So people that are going to seek entertainment are the people that are desperate for that, or they also have the money that they can spend. There's like disposable income for them to go do it. And since all the other avenues have shut down, I think we're seeing a significant growth in some of these revenues. But at the same time, if you look at the public gaming sector, because governments are losing a lot of money, or they're spending more money on these benefits, they actually, I'll give you an example, like Oregon State Lottery, they actually had to furlough people and lay off people because they weren't going to support all these people furloughed or working from home, while they're also incurring a lot of gap in their revenue. And suddenly what happened is they realized that they fund most of their education programs and a lot of public programs. Nearly 70% of that gets funded by their lottery system. And suddenly they realized they need that more than ever, and they urgently wanted to go back. So they started rehiring the people that they laid off. So you see this shift, and people are trying to adjust to it. They don't know what to do, how to see these things, and initially they make some decisions and then go back from both the governments and the operators and all those businesses, right? So there's a shift, quite a bit of it, and they're all trying to settle down and understand how to handle this going forward, I think.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point here, the overlap between, in your example just now, between gaming and education. I mean, I think the industry might be stigmatized by some, and depending on what lens you look at it from. And I think that really brings home at how overlapping these different verticals actually truly can be, and they're not nearly as siloed as we originally thought. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just here, right? I mean, a lot of European countries do the same thing, and most of Canadian provinces, almost all of them, I think, depend heavily on gaming revenue, because you don't want to tax people, but gaming gets taxed at a much higher level. And gaming revenue is what they use to fund their educational programs or public programs like that. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of these governments, and it's very deep rooted that they're a very important part of their societies.
Yeah, and from what you're saying too as well, you highlighted that there's a whole B2B supply chain going. So it's not just you guys; you're sort of dependent, and cooperating, co-working with a bunch of different folks from different even industries as well too. So it's a whole ecosystem.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's like take New York State for example, right? New York actually has nearly $1 billion funded through the gaming programs for all their schools. And it's not just that, they also use this for their midday meals programs too. Yeah. So there is a lot of poverty-related programs that they fund through this, because they cannot tax somewhere else and bring it, and it doesn't play well in the public space when you're talking about taxing. And it gets very polarized when the debate becomes it's taxing somebody to help the poor. So it's easy for them to go through these things. And we expect a lot of that to change in the near future too. When the governments get back to normal, they will see a big deficit, and they'll start providing licenses or start expanding their gaming involvement, I think.
And when you speak to kind of getting back to normal, or whatever the new normal is, or Dave sometimes makes fun of me. I say the new abnormal because we can't define it. I mean, it's part of my job as an analyst to project in the future, and it's kind of been an interesting exercise in absurdity at times. You just really don't know. But I'm going to ask you anyway. In your opinion, what is the future of gaming, given the shift and that you just spoke to about its importance in governments as well as its importance in the workplace? Do you see it becoming more central, or do you think that it's just been like the magnifying glass has been laid on how central it actually was, and people didn't really think about it in that way?
Yeah, I think people didn't think much, but I'll talk about gaming in general, not just the casinos or lottery style gaming, because there's a big shift and there's a lot of innovation happening. If you go back a few years ago, a lot of talk about gamification of everything. Everything's supposed to be gamified. And they took a lot of concepts of what we always used in these industries into other spaces, whether it's Facebook using the like buttons and stuff like that. There's a lot of iPods and Apples versus anything else that you think about the software, enterprise software. They were trying to gamify things so it's easy for you to log in, it's easy for you to add your information. So there is elements of there's several elements of gaming that would go into all aspects. At the same time, that's how innovation works. You cross-pollinate ideas, right? So you will also see other ideas come into space, into gaming space too. For instance, if you look at the AI and AR and all this involvement, virtual reality is probably a little far away. That is very hardcore gamers who will go into that. But augmented reality especially is being used in a lot of places already. And I think the evolution towards that will be faster now, because you don't want people to use somebody else's device or touch screens that are not belonging to you. Mm-hmm. So we will probably end up with the situation where everybody is already carrying a computer in their hand. So we can leverage those things. So a lot of that kind of evolution will happen. But I mean, I'll bring this back to one of the other points I was talking earlier about innovation itself and corporate innovation especially. I mean, at a fundamental level, innovation requires that you're solving a problem. But innovation in itself, it doesn't end when you solve the problem, because adoption is the other part of it. And Professor Zenios at Stanford has this equation. He says innovation equals invention plus adoption. Mm-hmm. If there is no adoption, obviously it's a great idea that no one used, right? So innovation requires that there is an adoption. So to solve a problem, you need creativity, obviously, and then you solve the problem. Now you have to focus on the adoption of it. And adoption increases if you actually can help your customers or users make an emotional connection. In design thinking, they call it the focusing on human-centeredness of the problem. But fundamentally, what you're trying to do is evoke emotions. So innovation requires that part, and that's very challenging because of multiple reasons, especially in big corporate settings. The corporations are not set up to fundamentally innovate, because corporations are taking advantage of generating revenue based on a well-established solution that they can produce at scale. Now, if you want to go with the idea of innovation there, that actually is against the idea of repeatability, right? You're trying to do something different, something new. So in these situations, these big corporations that are like, you can say market leaders, let's take in any industry, they will have to innovate in a way that's different from the second position corporations that are in the same industry. And then the small players in the same industry have to innovate differently, right? And so all these things make it really complex. But those that survive actually have brought this idea of cross-pollinating these ideas from other places and other areas and succeed. Now, one point I want to make that, which I'm really upbeat about, is this whole new talk about diversity. It wasn't there as much before, but people in the innovation aspects and academics always talked about how diversity is very important for creativity and also for innovation. And if you look at the debate today, it centers around fairness and justice, rightfully so, but that helps innovation a lot more. Nobody's talking about how it helps innovation, because when you're trying to be innovative, you're looking for diversity of thought, and diversity of thought can be easily accomplished when you have different people from different backgrounds and different genders and different ethnicities and all that stuff, without having to start to think about something different in your own mind, right? And the other aspect of it is, we don't debate this as a diversity of thought as a requirement. We say, oh, gender diversity is important and racial diversity is important. But if you look at it from an innovation standpoint, this is very easy to accomplish, because now you'll empower the people. Even though you're saying it's gender diversity, let's say there's 2 women on the group, you don't have to say it's because they're women, it's because of the diversity of thought. And that's very empowering. And that's when ideas flow. If you say, well, we need to check a box, so we need a woman in the group, that's just absurd. But when you say, we need diversity of thought, that's really empowering. And you see this all the time in really strong, innovative teams, that they want the opinions, they seek the opinions, and they seek the thoughts of people rather than looking for diversification for the sake of diversification. So I'm really upbeat, and from that perspective itself, that there'll be a lot more innovation coming just for that reason.
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but I want to sort of go back to the piece on adoption, because a lot of our audience are enterprise folks, right? And one of the big problems about enterprise software and so forth has been adoption. The whole notion of IT sort of just bringing down stuff on people and they have to use it, right? Go forth now and collaborate if it's a collaboration system, right? And I think what we saw now in under the guise of innovation and adopting things is that we have this global pandemic that sort of forced people, for instance, to use remote, conferencing software, right? Everyone's now
Right.
on Zoom or WebEx, and they didn't have to sort of sell it, right? There was a need that everyone sort of universally recognized we need to either, meet with our teams, we need to do distance learning. And so everyone realized we need, virtual collaboration, real-time collaboration software. And so there is that point, of the adoption curve where, the need and the crisis sort of, evokes a response, right? And I'm wondering too, as you're seeing your industry, is there any sort of curve or tipping point where a need will sort of evoke certain responses?
Definitely. I mean, it's important to see that there is you're solving this problem because you want to increase your market share, you want to do whatever the requirement, you're trying to do it because of that. But the adoption comes in. Did you solve it the right way for the right people?
Yeah.
And are you bringing it to the table with the right business model behind it? Those things is where most of the ideas fail. I mean, I shouldn't call it fail. The adoption curve fails because when you make it very challenging for someone to use your brilliant solution, right, just to log in. You take the example of there are so many chatting applications that were created early on, and only WhatsApp took off in globally.
Yeah.
Nothing else changed. One of the things that WhatsApp did, which is very simple, is to allow people to use their phone number to log in, to create an account. Everybody else needed an email address. In a lot of the countries in the world, they don't have email addresses. They barely have any penetration of internet. So, but they all have phones. So it made it very easy for them, right? And that makes a connection. And you take Apple. This is a great example of how to come up with a really complicated product and do really painful things in the product, eliminate all this stuff that they like, and yet make them like your product. So Apple is good at eliminating anything that they don't think is going to be useful in the long run. Like they were the first ones to remove disk drives, they were the first ones to remove DVD drives, and they were the first ones to move to USB-C. And people hated that. But they made it so easy to adapt to that solution. They made it so easy to like it. And if you look at Bill Atkins or anybody from the previous generation of Apple guys, they always used to say people fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. Right? The comments are around how people liked it emotionally rather than, oh, we did this such a great product. This is a box that has 2 different ports and 10 different things. But they actually made it so people feel like they're connected emotionally to it, right? So that's the stuff that helps the adoption curve more than anything else.
All right, I think that's a really good point that resonates with probably anyone who's ever lost an iPhone before. I think I tailspin into an emotional crisis.
Right.
Happen. And it really does feel like you've lost an emotional component of who you are for a period of time. And not to over amplify that, but your point is really well taken. And I think this, the area of gaming was not where I expected to get the kind of nugget of connectivity that you've been speaking to between invention, innovation, adoption, and it even kind of harkens back to an interview I just had earlier today with a totally unrelated company that talked about continuous intelligence, that it's an ongoing process and feedback loop that as we evolve, that the thinking behind all of these different interconnected technologies evolves as well. So this has been a really cool and I was expecting to have an interesting conversation, but not necessarily a surprising one. So, Keshav, we're really excited to have had you as our guest, and we will certainly be following up with you in the coming months to see where Scientific Games is at, and what other things you guys have come up with.
Great. Yes. Excited to share whatever I know. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, take care, and thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Keshav.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye, guys.